It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Peres coming to you from Baltimore. Let's face it, we are all very confused about the Trump administration's policies in general. But its economic policies in particular has given way to an important debate that is currently underway among Democrats, progressives, and the left. It's about the stance on Trump's economic policies and how to react to it. On one hand, they all agree, progressives agree, that some of his policies on, say, taxes, finance, industry regulations, climate change, and Obamacare are extremely problematic. On the other hand, things are less clear when it comes to Trump's policy proposals on infrastructure spending and on international trade that he is quickly trying to undo previous agreements like NAFTA. Joining us to help figure out these problems and how to begin thinking about it is Gerald Epstein. He is a professor at UMass Amherst in economics, and he's the co-director of Political Economy Research Institute at UMass Amherst. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jerry.
Thanks, Sharmini, for having me.
So, Jerry, you've recently published an article in the journal Challenge titled Trumponomics, Should We Just Say No? So let's discuss that. And let's begin with you telling us what is Trumponomics and how should we begin to think about it?
Yeah, the problem is that progressive economists have many years of experience analyzing, critiquing, proposing alternatives to neoliberal economics, the kind of economics that the Bush administration, that Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton came up with, Hillary Clinton was going to come up with, this kind of free market economics. And we're pretty good. We've developed a lot of good analyses to criticize those. And the question is, whether these same kinds of critiques and analyses work with Trumponomics. They tend to be kind of on a case-by-case basis, this policy versus that policy. How could we tweak it? How could we make it better? What's going to be the impact on inequality, et cetera? And what I argue is that that's not sufficient for understanding and analyzing Trumponomics, because Trumponomics is really part of a whole political movement, a whole system whose goal is to amass as much power as possible, to reduce the power of alternative groups and opposing groups in society. And what we need to do is look at each of these policies as part of a whole movement on the part of Trumpism, really, which I identify as a proto-fascist movement. And I think when we're analyzing the policies coming out of a proto-fascist movement, that is a movement that is on the road to a kind of right-wing populism or autocratic fascist system, we have to analyze it all as a piece. So that's kind of the main argument I want to make.
So, Jerry, before we get into the details of the policies themselves, your article outlines 6 economic doctrines that you think Trump might be following, but you narrow in on 2 of those most likely scenarios. Which are these 2 economic doctrines, and why do you think Trump is following them?
Well, the first thing we have to do is figure out what Trumponomics is. So we have to, as I just suggested, identify what is the political movement that is pushing Trumponomics. But second of all, what kind of economics is it? And I think a lot of us are confused trying to come to grips with this. A number of people have argued that it's a kind of Keynesian economics that is based on demand policy, government expenditure, tax cuts, et cetera. A second type, though, that is more accurate is a kind of reactionary Keynesianism, because after all, the kinds of tax cuts and fiscal expenditures that Trump is proposing will benefit the top 1% much more than anybody else. So it's going to lead to a much less equal income distribution. A third type that's probably even more accurate is a kind of military Keynesianism, because a lot of this expenditure, fiscal expansion, which Trump is proposing, is on more military expenditure. And so this has can have a very negative impact on the economy, can lead to military adventures, imperialism, and so forth. Some people, Jeff Madrick, for example, has argued this isn't really a Keynesian set of policies at all. It's kind of a Reagan-esque supply-side economics, where the idea is you cut taxes, that's supposed to generate a lot more effort and productivity, and in the end you have a lower budget deficit than you started with because output goes up so much. This, of course, has been totally debunked. We know this can't work, but some of Trump's advisors have proposed this kind of perspective. All of these are types of economics that we have good experience analyzing and critiquing. But there are two further types that I think are going to be especially important in analyzing Trump, and we don't have as much experience analyzing. The fifth is a kind of crony capitalism or kleptocracy. Clearly, Trump's policies, where he has massive conflicts of interest with his family and his business holdings around the world, and he has now appointed a lot of his business buddy billionaires to the government. Clearly, there's a huge agenda in Trumponomics for crony capitalism and kleptocracy. Now, we here in the United States, progressive economists, haven't been quite so familiar with analyzing this, though the financial crisis gave us a lot of practice doing that. Our colleagues who studied kleptocracies around the world, though, have a lot more experience with analyzing this, and we have to make this kind of analysis central, I think, to our understanding of Trumponomics. But the final type of perspective to look at this, I think, is the one we have least experience with and is the most difficult. And this is what I call shocked therapy, S-C-H-A-C-H-T. It's kind of a play on Hitler's economic minister, Yomar Schacht, who was central in designing Hitler's policies of managed trade, massive infrastructure investment. He built the Autobahn and other kinds of public works, remilitarization, and so forth. Now, what's so troubling about this kind of set of policies, is that it has short-term benefits for workers. It has short-term benefits for business. It promotes economic growth. It even has elements that many progressives on the left in the United States and elsewhere have been talking about for decades. So it has this kind of family resemblance to things that we've been proposing. But obviously, as in the case of Schacht, it led to a disaster. And it's these kinds of policies, managed trade, infrastructure, where I think the left is going to have a lot of trouble sorting out what it really means. And I'm urging that the left and progressives really need to see this in the context of this entire Trumpism, this movement, which I call a proto-fascist movement.
Jerry, there's so much more to discuss here in terms of how we look at Trumponomics. Let's continue this discussion in part 2.